Hello and welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. I'm Jenny Stevenson, your host, and joining me is Dr. Peter Bernstein and Mimi Amaral. Today we will continue in our series on how to survive through adversity. Dr. Bernstein, or Peter as he likes to be called, is a coach and mentor with 49 years of experience helping people survive and grow through trauma, struggles, and hard times, the stuff of real life. The goal of our series is to help you discover what we've experienced, that adversity is more than a trial to endure. It can be an exciting opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. And we're back with Mimi, and when people hear this podcast, it will be a new year.
And that's what we want to wish everyone before this stuff,
Yes.
Happy New Year. And I hope everybody had a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and what's the other one?
Kwanzaa, Festivus.
What is it?
Kwanzaa.
There's so many holidays.
Diwali.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
holidays. There's a lot. So just to acknowledge everybody, but have a good Happy New Year.
Yes.
And may it be a good, healthy restart to your life this year.
Yeah.
And we got a special show today, too.
We really do.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it's special.
Yes, we just finished a series on hope, practical hope, understanding hope, and I think today may be, because this is so important, the start of another set. We're going to start to look today at honoring and expressing our grief.
The human condition. That's right. We are so on the front lines, and it's interesting how many people now that I'm going through a rough time with taking care of Lynn in the last part of her life. How many people are coming to us and they're dealing with grief and loss. It's astounding to me, but we're dealing with it a lot. We're dealing with the need for caregiving. How to caregive. Sitting over here is one of a team of people that are caregivers that are astoundingly good. I look at them as angels. They're amazing. She's the head of them all, but they're all in their own right.
Mimi is very actively caregiving for her mother.
And
right
Mimi's
now.
a
She was on the
caregiver.
phone with
Thank
her
you.
mother just a few minutes ago.
Mimi is a caregiver. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's right. We celebrate caregivers.
We do.
So we've dealt with many families that are struggling with losing loved ones, but also taking care of them as they're in the last stages of their life, and how important caregiving is, and what we see caregivers go through, and the impact of the people they love, and the grief that they feel, even while the person's still alive. It's called,
Ambiguous.
you know what? It doesn't matter if I have a PhD. I still can't
That
remember
word
that.
just doesn't stick
It's
with you. I
okay.
know.
It doesn't stick in my brain.
No.
I hear you on that
Isn't
one.
that weird? But but the absolute experience, it sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
Ambiguous grief being a loss, where you're feeling the loss of a person and they're still here, but yet they're drifting away because they're in the last stages of dying, the end of life, or the sicknesses that they're going through. So you're losing them.
Your
Yes.
relationship is changing, and it feels like loss.
It
is
is a loss.
Yes.
And Mimi, I mentioned earlier, divorce.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's so many different forms of grief that we see at work. And
Yes.
a lot of the time, if you don't label it clinically, they're grieving.
Yeah. There's
Um,
relationship grief, a separation from family grief. There's.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we've seen
Retirement,
grief.
people who
Retire, we've seen
Yeah.
that could be
A loss
good
of-
or deadly.
of
Yeah.
purpose, a loss of purpose in
That
life.
loss of
Yeah.
purpose
Or
is
identity.
deadly.
All
Yes.
that has to be honored, witnessed, felt,
Absolutely.
embraced.
The other, even what we have people come to us, and I'm thinking of some women that are looking at their lives and they realize that they had an expectation about what kind of relationship they're going to have, the love relationship, and all that it was going to be, and they never had it.
Yeah.
And they're at the point in their lives they know they never will. And they're grieving,
And-
really grieving,
Absolutely.
because they realize it will never happen.
Yeah.
And they've had to move on from that. And it's very tough. So we're seeing that the human condition is filled with losses. I've talked to someone recently, no, not someone, but a number of people, and they see what I'm going through with Lynn, and others that were taking care of it, and they said, I just hope that never happens to me. And I listened to them going, I think I said it to a lady who's 78, I forgot it, the other day, we all are going to go through this.
Absolutely.
And she says, well, I just hope I don't have to ever face what you're facing. And I'm going, you will. Everybody has to.
All of us.
But you know, a lot of folks don't want to.
Don't want to.
They don't want to look at. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
No.
But when I
get it.
hear it now, I'm going,
It's not easy.
wow, are they going to get? Is it going to kick them hard?
Yeah.
Because they're in such denial that when it finally happens,
Yeah.
it's bad enough.
Yes.
But these folks are so ill-equipped and unprepared. So to me, that is, burying your head in the sand type of attitude.
Yeah.
That to me is not the way to go.
Yeah.
But yet, I'll be honest with you, I hear more and more people have that attitude about it. And then I look at caregivers, and they're the opposite. They've embraced this as part of their life. It's a calling upon their lives. They embrace it. They know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
They have empathy and compassion
Yeah.
and abilities at that last stage. We've seen it so beautifully. Most of the time, and I know this isn't 100%, it's other cultures. They're coming from other cultures that have embraced this as just a part of life. As a kid, they know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Here in the United States, we don't embrace
We
it.
don't always do that. I'd like to read something that
Go
we were
ahead.
looking at this morning.
Yeah.
I think this will pertain to what you were talking
Go ahead.
about. And as we say, can understand
Yeah.
how people are not looking forward to finding it very hard to have to look at this side of their life and the people that they love.
Mhm.
This is a reading from Jewish Reflections on Death, and it's a section written by a woman named Deborah Lipstadt. Death is a concept that exists in the dark and distant recesses of the mind. When it rears its head, it is treated in hushed and muted tones and considered to be something from which individuals, especially children, should be sheltered.
Mm.
It is ironic, though completely plausible, that there is an attempt to protect and thereby separate oneself from the reality which is death. Nothing will change that reality, and all that can be accomplished is to heighten its mysterious, incomprehensible, and frightening aspects. She goes on to talk about her experience at the time of my father's death and a direct encounter with the Jewish traditions of death and mourning. I found them to be the exact antithesis, the exact opposite of the tendency to separate oneself from reality. One is gently guided through this cataclysmic period by customs and ceremonies which provide a framework for mourning, permit grief, and place the ultimate emphasis on the cyclical nature of life. And I think this is an excellent, almost a summary, a good picture of where we would like to go today in our podcast.
It is, and she said it. What's her name?
Deborah Lipstadt.
Deborah Lipstadt. Well, I got to say, she was able to put it together so beautifully and describe the kind of difficulty we're seeing with this condition of life. And here she's talking about it. And it's not just our culture. It's us, we personally want to not look at it. And I think all of us have that component. The part that we don't have is support for not doing that and to face it and to deal with it as part of life. And she says it beautifully.
Yeah.
She's also talking about something that I was raised in. Now, I'm not a practicing Jew anymore. I was raised in a more observant, what they call conservative Orthodox background. Orthodoxy being the most rigid and the most demanding with rituals. Conservative or very observant. My family was very observant. They were between the two. They're not quite as Orthodox, but my father was plenty. His father was very Orthodox. Then they had another part of it called Reformed, and that was that was closer to Christianity. And yet these two parts of Judaism looked down upon them terribly. And they would actually ostracize parts of their family if they became Reformed Jews instead of this. I could never get my heart around anything like that, and yet I saw it happen. So there were many things I saw in my background that even as a kid I could not swallow, and I didn't. So my father and I had he had problems with me. And I was in a lot of trouble, not just there, but on the streets. And I didn't go along with it. And yet I was consumed by it because it was a big part of my upbringing. I rejected a lot of it. And yet, what I'm realizing now, going through the grieving process, going through loss, helping other people go through it, is there's a part of me that is definitely that Old Testament kind of thinking about honoring the human condition.
That there is value there.
It is in me.
Yes.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm glad. I am so appreciative. Today I am a Christian, and yet what I see is a completion because I had all the Old Testament kinds of things in me first. No matter what my attitude toward was, it's in me. And then to see that moved forward was such a relief for me. I felt beyond between, this is just me, I felt I was being released from prison. I swear, it felt like a freedom that came over me. Because I needed to see something better that was forgiving and loving, not judgmental and condemning. And it was so freeing for me to even, this is me. I started reading about Jesus now. With my background, that was considered treason to even talk that way. But I got very curious. And frankly, it was a very interesting journey for me that I'm very grateful for. But I know in me, the Old Testament traditions had an impact on me in a good way. And the good way is that they respected the human condition and honored it and put rituals together that really gave people a place to allow them to, at least to a point, to go through what they ever had to go through. They were human beings that were going through a very hard grieving period. So they would have rituals and customs and times allotted for the folks to do that. It was very intense, and yet it was very, very important. We're helping people today grieve at our institute when they come to us. A lot of it, in fact. And you know what? There's no place in our society anymore.
No.
That even honors.
Much less than there was.
And so people are confused because they're feeling all these things. It's affecting their functioning, and yet they have to go right back to work, get right back on the road, do all these things, and they're hurting. They're more than hurting.
Yes, and they're feeling lost about how to, as we say, how to experience this, how to work it through, and how to not just bury the whole thing. That's
and also
right.
to have permission.
Have permission.
To honor what they're going
And
through.
grieve.
Yes.
Honor the grief itself.
Absolutely.
Embrace the grief itself.
Absolutely. So.
And the space.
You've been listening to The Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to The Survivor's Guide to Life. I'm your host, Jenny Stevenson. Today we are looking at how to honor and express our grief. And in our first segment today, we talked about the range of responses to loss and all of the different kinds of loss we can experience. Death of a loved one, change in a relationship, loss of purpose or meaning in our life, divorce, retirement. And we talked about how people can tend to want to avoid and deny their grief and the overwhelming emotions that come with that. Or they can become lost in it in what we are going to call protracted grief, not be able to find their way back. And a key to, an older key to navigate this time of life was found in many traditions, including, we were talking a little specifically about the Jewish tradition that would help recognize this human condition of grief and how to work through it and express it.
And Mimi was telling, she was raised in a Catholic, Roman Catholic, and they
Mimi
have that
has a family tradition there as well, and is part of your background.
Mm-hmm. I don't embrace or adhere to, like you, the Roman Catholic, but it was actually a beautiful part of my journey, especially with my Nana, who passed away at 101 in year 2000. It's just, it gave a foundation of, you know, what could be and how to honor our elders and how to honor grief and how to honor death and how to transition in a you know, kind of a respectful way.
No, not kind. They really did give a lot of respect. I'm not Catholic, but I remember in our growing up, they honored death, the grief, plenty.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time, but when my grandmother passed, I was 10, and 7 days prior to, there was mourning process. Everybody went and prayed and, honored the body, and I remember at 10 climbing up a ladder and kissing my grandmother goodbye, and then afterwards, there was like a 4-hour ceremony and mass at the church, and then we all went over to the burial site as well, and then there was an hour or two there, and
Wasn't
then
there
afterwards
a wake?
there was a wake afterwards for another 7 days.
But what
There was a
about
lot
the
of
viewing
prayer.
of the body?
The viewing of the body is prior to. If it can be anywhere from 7 to 5 or 3 days prior to what I remember. It's been a really long time.
Yeah.
So, and everybody during that time, wore dark clothing to honor the passing of, my grandmother. Her husband my grandfather, for a very long time afterwards wore dark clothing. My Nana, my Nana's my great-grandmother. My Nana, after my great-grandfather, who I never met, passed away, never wore any other color than black again. My whole upbringing, she always had black dresses on.
Were they Italian?
Nana's Portuguese.
Portuguese.
Yes.
I remember older Italian people I knew that where I grew up, they did
Yeah.
that too. But you know what? Before I go on here, we forgot to do something I think is very important. Mimi wrote a book, her latest book.
Yes.
And I think we should at least bring it up again because it's a good practical guide. It's not as this book she's written is very down to earth, and it should be something that people have to refer to when they're going through loss. It's not about the traditions of grieving as much as
There was a section on grieving in the book, but you're right, there was a lot of very practical information
hers
too.
is very practical about what to do, and boy is it important.
Yeah.
So
Thank
why don't
you
you
so
just tell the name of the book again?
It's called Death, Before and After, A Survivor's Guide. And why I called it A Survivor's Guide is because I walked my father to his non-existence or death. And during that process, I didn't know anything. And I had to learn as I went and cross each bridge as I went. And while I was going through that, I promised myself that I would hopefully help others never have to feel as lost and confused as I did while doing that with my father.
Which is a very important thing, because most people wait. You see, this is the problem that we're talking about. And what she did dovetails into what I'm talking about.
Yes.
When people do not want to look at the realities of dying and death as part of life, and then it's on top of them, it's so much worse. And then there's the practicalities, the logistics, the things that they have to face and come to grips with fast.
Absolutely.
And there's business involved, there's
There's
legal
so much.
issues involved, there's funeral arrangements, cemetery arrangements, all these different things. And all of a sudden, they have to deal with all of that. And if they haven't really embraced this part of that, this is a condition of life, it's so much worse.
Absolutely.
So Mimi put together a book that is so practical. I think all of hospice should use it,
Thank you.
because it really is helpful for people as a guideline on how to handle different parts of the loss of a loved one, what to do, what you're going to go through, what you need to face. And I don't mean religiously. I mean practically, down
Logistics.
to earth.
Day
You got to
by
know.
day.
You got to know how to deal with the business of
Dying.
and grieving. And let me
Yeah.
tell you, there is a business to it too,
Absolutely.
unfortunately. But even in the dying process today, of dealing with corporations that are buying up all of these memory care facilities and elder care facilities, they're buying hospice programs all over the country. Corporations see the dollar signs,
Opportunity.
opportunities,
Yeah.
and they shouldn't be part of it. That's
Yeah.
my take on it. After I've been involved with advocating for folks that are just devastated and then having to deal with the business aspects of it,
Yeah.
and the medical and whatever, and all of a sudden it comes down on them hard, and it can be extraordinarily heartless.
Yeah.
you're talking about denying the process. This is exploiting it. It's happening too. So there's certain realities that Mimi wrote about in her book that if people have that, it's going to be a little harder to be exploited, because she writes out what you have to pay attention to, what you need to do. And I've been through it. And I'm one of those folks that did have to learn it the hard way, but I learned lots of things the hard way. So for me, it's bring it on. I'll learn it and I'll move fast. And I've done that, but it's not a pleasant process. I don't like it. I know now with Lynn and stuff, I've made plans this time. So I don't have to do it at the height of a crisis, which will come. And that is so much, it's horrible. And there are people that exploit it.
Yeah.
I've seen it in the cemetery business. I've seen it in the mortuaries. I've seen it in the elder care facilities. That's astounding me that they're getting away with this. But the money, it's all about. It's not about the person. It's about
It's all
money.
about the bottom line.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
So what I look for, or what I call the jewels in this process, there are people in it. Even though they work for these, they are almost angels. They're so sweet and empathetic and caring that even though they're dealing with the business of it,
they don't lose sight of the person in front of them and the pain and the grief
what they're going
through.
I have to say,
Yeah.
I have had the time, because Lynn's been sick for so long now, to meet some of these incredible jewels. And I want to tell you, it's like a burden off my shoulders all of a sudden that I have somebody who really gets it. And so, yes, I have to deal with the business of it, but I'm dealing with someone who's got such empathy and genuine caring. And most of the time when I found out, they've gone through so many hard times with it personally that never goes away. So their heart comes before the money. That's different.
Yeah.
But they're unique in that world. That's all I can tell you. We've been fortunate. We do know a lot of jewels. I call them angels too. I know a lot of good people, but I really seek them out. When I run up against the others, it doesn't work well for me. I don't like to deal with them. I don't hide it I don't want to hide it, frankly. But the other part of it appalls me. It really, there's something in my deeper senses of how heartless can you be at a time like this?
Yeah.
The answer is plenty heartless. They see it as it's just business. And to me that's a cop-out, because it's the business of helping people who are grieving and taking them through this and giving them a helping hand. There's a mortuary cemetery outfit, I shouldn't call them out, they are angels. Here in Petaluma it's called Adobe Creek.
I know
They
that.
are such nice, good people. And I was so grateful. Who sent me over there? Paramedics that I knew. Hospice people that I knew.
Yeah.
They said, check out Adobe Creek. They are the kindest people. And the first time I went, it was when we thought Lynn was finished. The first time I was in crisis. They were so sweet to me. They went through the business. I'll never forget it. And then the owner of it, one of the owners said, I think you ought to go home and just be with your wife and let yourself grieve. And we'll take care of everything else for you.
Yeah.
To me, that was perfect. But fortunately for me, Lynn didn't pass away then. And she came out of it, but it also opened my eyes. I better lay these things out so when the time comes, that I don't have to be so under such incredible pressure. So I've been learning that. Now I've helped other people. I've had other members of my family that I've had to deal with the whole thing. So this isn't the first time. I've dealt with, and the religious issues came up, dealing with my family, and that was pretty heartless stuff. Not some of my family, but no. So the way that business was, I couldn't believe, and of course, it got me angry. What really outraged me is, how could you be so heartless at a time like this? You know what the answer is? They are. That's all there is to it. It's business. So what we want to tell people is that's not the way that you have to go about dealing with this at all. Mimi's book will help them and give them a foundational support during this time.
Right.
And I think it's a very important book.
So that they
Thank you
don't
so much.
arrive there at that stage unprepared and lost and confused, as you said,
Yes.
that you felt. And Peter, you bring up something that I want to just point out again, that we were talking about how the natural, not good maybe, but natural problem of wanting to avoid or deny grief and the difficulties or getting caught in it in a very deep way. You're mentioning that there are people who can take advantage of us in our grief, or there can be people who do not give us a place, do not make it all right, let us feel that we have permission to feel our grief.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Permission. We have to give ourselves permission.
First and foremost, I have to agree with that.
What is that? What that?
We are time for a break, so would it be okay, since I just brought up a
Then you
new
better
topic?
just reiterate what
Yes.
the topic.
I
again.
will when we come back.
Yeah.
No, just to remind me.
Oh, that not only do we have the tendency, unfortunately, to try to deny and avoid this very painful part of life, but we can have people who make us wrong for feeling it, who don't give us permission or a
Okay.
place to feel.
Let's hold on.
Okay.
That's good.
You've been listening to The Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to The Survivor's Guide to Life. I'm your host, Jenny Stevenson. We're continuing our podcast today on honoring and expressing grief. We have been talking about traditions, both Jewish and Catholic, the ways that honor this very human condition and experience. And we talked about the unfortunate way that people who are unprepared for the death of a loved one and can become overwhelmed with the different demands, legal, medical, financial at that time, can be helped by our guest, Mimi Amaral's book, A Death Before and After, A Survivor's Guide. That brought up something further, which is that not only, unfortunately, can we have the tendency to try to avoid feeling these very difficult, painful feelings, we can, in our experience of grief, end up being around people who don't want to give us a place or permission to feel them for any number of reasons. And we wanted to return to that.
That's common. But you know, there was, in that book, there was a woman that described the process of grieving. Do you remember that?
This book?
Yeah.
Do you want to go here now?
Do you remember it?
We had the process. There was another section here that talked about the stages of early grief and mourning in the
Remember how
Jewish
she
tradition.
described, there was a description.
This was actually a man who wrote this. This was the very beginning, at death, between death and burial, and this was this man's very beautiful expression. Very, I'm trying to think, fluent. That's not it. It's a very powerful.
Let me hear
You want
it.
to hear that?
If it's this one, because
All right.
I want people to feel acknowledged for, in a non-judgmental and non-clinical way, how intense grieving is, and the many forms that it takes are all so intense.
Yeah.
If this is the
Yes.
section,
Yes.
this guy really put it together.
This man, in very powerful language, described the very first reaction, first experience of death. This is a description of what might be happening between the moment of death and burial.
Of a loved one.
Of a loved one.
Yeah.
This is not when you are rational, reasonable, getting perspective back. This is the raw experience.
What did it? Could you
Okay.
read it? Yeah.
So he said that this is that there's a name for this in the Jewish tradition. This time of grief, and it's called ananut. He says ananut represents the spontaneous human reaction to death. It is an outcry, a shout, a howl of grisly horror and disgust. Man responds to his defeat at the hands of death with total resignation and with an all-consuming, masochistic, self-devastating black despair. Beaten by the friend, I think he's referring to God, his prayers rejected, enveloped by a hideous darkness, forsaken and lonely, man begins to question his own human singular reality. Doubt develops quickly into a cruel conviction, and doubting man turns into mocking man. At whom does man mock? At himself. He starts downgrading and denouncing himself. He dehumanizes himself. He arrives at the conclusion that man is not human. He's just a living creature like the beasts in the field. Let's see. If everything human terminates in the narrow, dark grave, why be a man at all? Why make the pretense of being the choicest of all creatures? Why be committed? Why carry on the human moral load? He goes on.
Oh, good. The reason we're reading this is to one thing. When people are going through the emotional components of grieving, they can mistakenly take what this man just wrote. I mean, and he's describing it, I want to say beautifully. Horror. It's a horror to go through grief. That's what people go through. I mean, it's human, and it's horrible. But remember, that's a reflection of emotionality and hopelessness and despair and discouragement and fear and agony at the loss. And everybody, when they go through it, if they know, it's a very intense, devastating experience without any perspective, though. That's another
Not
part.
here, not at this time.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is everybody needs to have the permission to allow themselves to go through this, and it's a horrible experience, but it's not permanent. It's transitional. And as bad as it is, you're going to come out of it. If you allow yourself the time to grieve and go through this.
Yeah.
That's what's so important. If you don't, these are the remnants that stay with you and begin to affect your outlook on life and perspective. And it can be pretty negative, cynical, bitter, awful. And I've seen, we've helped people that have come to us that carry these kinds of burdens for years, and we have to help them turn it around. What we're saying is, yes, you go through this. We all have to. We do in one form or another. It's a nightmare for a period of time. And you shouldn't have to worry about perspective completely. But the reflections of hopelessness are coming from your emotions. It is not coming from your feeling state. It's not really coming from any kind of broader picture of reality. Or we talked last time about the tapestries of life. This is one part. Agonizing, hellish.
One of the very worst parts.
Worst parts.
But it's human and real.
And even when I think about it, it just sickens me. And yet, this is what it feels like. And physically, can be even worse. And yet, you have to know that this isn't the whole picture at all. And you got to let yourself go through it, but you can't take it literally. That is so important, because there is hope, and there will be hope, and there will be a better day. I assure you of that. So folks, when you're going through this, we want to know, you need the permission to allow you. It's a normal human condition, not a clinical disorder. And I emphasize that. Doctors and psychiatrists, please hear that. And I'm a man that was in the psychological field for almost 50 years. I'm saying this is not a clinical condition.
It's a natural human condition.
It's a natural human condition, and people need to be allowed to go through this. If it goes on for long, long times, then you can really hit something clinical, and that's trouble.
And you've called that protracted grief.
That's protracted grief. That's rough. And we've helped people
We've
about
had
that.
people that, and it's interesting because the person that comes to mind most for that is someone who really did not grieve and did not allow themselves to. I'm not sure they were allowed to, and so it was buried.
That's a problem. And we've seen, I just had that recently at a funeral, and a man who just lost his wife 3 months before hadn't shed a tear. And he was saying all these things he was finally doing for himself to improve himself. And I asked him, how about emotionally? And he says, well, nothing like that's come up. And I haven't even cried. And this is his wife who he lost over many years. In fact, he slept with her in the hospital while she was dying. It wasn't a man who ran away.
He didn't run away from that at all.
Oh, no, he was right there with her. It's what he was running away from was what this man in this book, that agony.
This agony.
And he was running from that. Now, can you blame him? No way.
No.
And yet, I remember saying to him, listen, you've got to do this. You've got to let yourself do this. I'll even help you. But you've got to do it to recover. And he says, well, I'm getting inklings that something may be coming up a little bit. And I said, honor that and let it come. But you can understand why people don't.
Yeah.
But that kind of fear is very destructive. And on the other hand, you've got to also have people around who have some perspective.
I would say that this experience could be so overwhelming and so frightening if someone felt alone.
Yes.
And that is part of the value of the traditions that we've been talking about,
Yes,
is that
thank
people
you.
are not alone in this experience.
Yeah.
That's right.
But for those out there who don't have traditions that they embrace, they can do their own ritual or their own tradition. You know, like myself, I don't embrace my family's religious beliefs. I am not religious. But I do my own rituals. And doing something that's uniquely to me, very special, and be able to release, like with my father, and at some point in the near future, my mom, and then jointly them, I was describing to Jenny, a ritual that I aspire to do.
And you mentioned that you would do it with other people.
I would do it with key humans that know how to hold the space and that are completely non-judgmental of my spiritual practice, and have their loving energy around me. Correct. Yes.
That's very important.
Yes. Yes.
It is. I've always been somebody who grieved alone. And I can grieve intensely, but I was almost trained in my work how to do it. And yet, no matter if I had 10 people around, I'd still feel alone.
Yeah.
When you're in the midst of it, the intensity physically and emotionally, it could be it is overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And I'm used to it. But I still say it's the most devastating. It's devastating.
It is. It feels.
It is devastating. And I remember as a kid actually participating in these Jewish, they called it sitting Shiva for 7 days. It was the scariest thing to me, to see people I knew absolutely overwhelmed emotionally. And I remember a beloved cousin of mine, my cousin Beverly, who's in Florida today. I'm still very close to her. She used to be my babysitter. She said I drove her crazy. But, yeah, I was a little wild. But anyway, Beverly, I remember when her dad passed away. He died, and he was very young. He was about, I think he's 40. And she was devastated. I will always remember it. And the way she came out emotionally was she'd be crying, then she'd be laughing hysterically. And I remember she'd be laughing, and all of a sudden she was hysterical. And I remember she wanted to be left alone in her bedroom, and I could hear her. And I remember not knowing what to do to go in the comfort. It was so overwhelming, overpowering, but you could hear the going back and forth between laughing hysterically and crying hysterically. And I remember other people having other forms of expressing it. Beverly had a great impact on me. I love Beverly. I also found out later that she hadn't been getting along with her father before he died. And she had an awful lot of guilt. It wasn't her fault. She didn't do anything so terrible when she was 16 years old.
Yeah.
But I remember how guilty she felt, and it made her feel just half crazed. Very difficult. That was one, but there were lots of people around at that time in a home. It was an apartment, grieving, and it was coming out in all different forms. Yeah. And it was devastating to a young person. I wasn't prepared for any of that. But I remember seeing it at other times too.
Yeah. I think allowing oneself and accepting the emotion and cathartic soul split pain that can come out from a loss. It could be a relationship, it could be anything where you just feel so intense and your skin is crawling and you just want to just rip yourself open and cry. I think we all hopefully can work on that and allow ourselves in certain aspects of our life to just grieve and feel it and allow it out. I know I did it just 2 years ago from a relationship, and you know, like we were saying, it's not like this time of life, it's throughout our life that we grieve for different things.
Absolutely.
And to accept that it's okay to just let it out without judgment towards ourselves. I think it's a key that
absolutely.
that
And you're
needs to
saying
be.
there are different experiences of loss in people's
Absolutely.
life. That's true.
Yeah.
There's something very specific about death, though.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
what you're saying is true, because we see the intensity of the loss of people who grieve from different things, and it's not always death. But I have to say, when it comes to losing a loved one to death, there is a devastating kind of, more of what that guy described.
Yeah.
And also the ambiguous loss type is so intense. And there's also a part of us that can't believe you're feeling this and going through all this horror, and the person is still alive.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's come back to that. All right, welcome. You've been listening to the Survivor's Guide to Life on KPCA Petaluma 103.3 FM. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to the Survivor's Guide to Life. I'm your host, Jenny Stevenson. We are going into the final segment of our podcast today, and our topic is honoring and expressing our grief. And just before our break, we were talking about, we got quite a vivid, from a reading, picture of the emotional agony that can come with the death of a loved one.
Right.
And we were talking about how not being alone, how maybe having a tradition to follow can help us to not deny, but to feel and move through that temporary but very human experience.
Right.
Just before the break, we mentioned that there are that grief can be different for different losses, including what we call ambiguous grief, when the person that we are losing is actually still alive, but the relationship is changing in some way.
Or their
And
physical condition is deteriorating.
they're deteriorating, and what you have had is changing with them. And I want to ask you, because you, Peter, because you went, just before we came back, and so I don't know if you want to, if there's something you want to be sure we get to
There is.
today.
I'm listening to this today, and I'm going, now I hope we don't lose anybody, because you're listening to this and it sounds really horrible and difficult. I don't want you to run away, because I want to offer you something that we talked about in the last episode, and that's hope, even through this.
Yes.
And, I've had more people talk to me, and when they hear about what I'm going through, the kind of things we're dealing with, they said, God, I hope I never have to go through that. And I look, you're kidding me. Everybody has to.
Yes.
But you know what? I'm not always in intense grief at all. And the strength that's coming out of this, the perspective, the purpose, the ability to help other people now with a deeper sense of empathy and humility, and an understanding that I didn't even have before. Clinically, sure, I've been in the field for almost 50 years. Let me tell you, never have I had the kind of empathy and understanding of my fellow human being as now. And I cherish that. What does that come out of? We call it Lynn's legacy. I'm losing my beloved wife. And if you don't think I'm grieving, she was my best friend for my entire time with her, 46 years. This was my best, closest friend, true soulmate. So yes, I feel it, but all the time, no. And I do a lot of other things, but the understanding that I have out of it, the appreciation for life and the little things, I've never had that. And if I did, I lost it a long time ago, because I had to go to have big things to make me feel better, going away on a lot of vacations and fast cars and fancy horses and everything else. That was fun. But guess what? The truth of the matter is, today, if I see my wife breathing, if I know that she wakes up in the morning and she can't talk almost anymore, but she can say a few words to me, which she did today. She hasn't been able to say a word to me in 2 days.
This has been a good day, yes.
Today she did. That made my day. Now, when I say it made my day, not like it used to when we used to really have an active life together, very active, physically, sexually, intimate, everything. No, we don't have that anymore. But the littlest things mean so much to me. And not just with Lynn, with other people too. And I have that now. I can accept that, no, I don't have to have such a big life anymore. I can, as long as I can, and people tell me, well, you go away. I said, I don't want to leave town. I want to make sure I'm here. And when Lynn takes her last breath, I want to be right there with her. So I'm not going anyplace. I do take time for self-care, it's true, but it's not these elaborate things. It's very close, simple things, and it makes my day for a little while. So what I want to offer through all of this is a sense of purpose and meaning and hope and encouragement for those folks, and Mimi has much more empathy for them than I do, for the folks that are running away, who are burying their head in the sand, who don't want to be near it. I know Mimi's my teacher on this, although I'm not a good student, because I go, where are you going? And because I'm always one of these people that engage with it, because I know I'm going to come out the other side, and I'm going to be stronger and better for it and more empathetic, and my purpose is going to be fuller than even before to help others.
Yeah, your point is that these things, these good changes come to you because you go through the experience, knowing that you can come through it and that something good will come even if you don't know right away what it will be.
Okay, and here's the thing. As intense as the grieving process is described today, I experience it regularly with ambiguous grief. It's intense.
Yes.
I know deeper down that there's hope. I know what you just said is true, that I'm going to come out of it and this isn't going to be the end. There's going to be another day and something good is going to come out of it eventually. Emotionally, I don't feel that way, but there's something in my mind that has perspective the whole time. I've been mentoring people on how to have both. To be honest with you, I've been encouraging those folks that are so consumed with grief that they need some perspective also.
Yeah.
For others that stay so caught up in their perspective that they don't allow themselves to feel anything emotionally, I encourage them to start dealing with the emotional aspects of it.
And that's why I wanted to kind of, I guess I could pose a question, but that's kind of why I wanted to share the experience of the relationship grief, because it's not just death that can create this kind of grief. And I'm kind of questioning and wondering, how can we make it more of a table conversation in every household? And hopefully, my book will help that. But I was talking with my girlfriend the other day, Mari, and we were discussing the loss of a friend of hers, and I said, well, if we were brought into the world and we were raised in a way that explains that death is just as beautiful in life, and when you lose a relationship, actually allowed to grieve and honor that grief during a relationship, whether it be your first crush or a divorce or whatever, as we were transitioning through each period, each section of our life, gathering tools on how to deal with each minor grief rather than ignore it and not feel it and not acknowledge that there are grief in all aspects of our life and along our entire journey. If we're allowed to understand that we are going to grieve throughout our lifetime, and at the end there's going to be grief of death of loved ones, maybe along the way we could pick up tools to help us process in a more healthy manner when a loved one dies, a wife or a husband or a father or a mother, by allowing the little aspects. And I'm not even going to say little, because sometimes when you truly love somebody, it's not little when the relationship ends. So I don't want to minimize that grief. And I don't want to minimize death either. I think grief is grief. I think that's a spectrum of the pain and suffering that is involved. And I think by today, by both of us, all of us, acknowledging that, wow, we have felt that intense loss, but that, look at us, we're here trying to help everybody else as well realize that, yeah, you have to feel that, you have to walk through it, but there is all different aspects, and there are different perspectives, and there are the next step to integrating or accepting, understanding why we had to go through that pain to expand us into a more expansive human to help others as well.
Yeah, you've talked about that often, Peter, about how the experiences you've gone through in your life and then come through them on the other side have built your strength and confidence and your ability to take on the next challenge.
Yes.
And that's what I hear Mimi talking about.
We've been talking about people, and Mimi was part of one of those conversations where we encourage people not to run away, as difficult as it is, because we're building our strength and our experiences that we're going to need to draw upon when we run into the next difficulty. They're part of life.
Absolutely.
We are allowed to have joy and happiness too.
Absolutely.
And that's really good stuff too. But we're talking about, hey, when you're in the tough times, it's nice to be able to draw on past experience to know you came through it.
Mm-hmm.
You're still here. In fact, you came through it in some ways for the better.
Yeah.
Because now you have something more heartfelt, deeper, more empathetic, more caring, lots of different things. So we see that there's coming out of it and understanding more deeply what a person is going through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I've had waitresses in town say, and some of them just recently said, no one can understand this until they go through it themselves.
And that's the truth.
And you know what? They are profoundly wise people.
Yeah.
They don't have PhDs. They're not clinicians. They're smarter.
Life
They're
experience.
more human and pure experience.
Wisdom from life.
Yep.
And that's their support to me.
Absolutely.
When they look to me and they know my wife and they know her and they know what I'm going through, they say, we see what you're going through.
Yeah.
Anything we can do for you.
Yeah.
And they say, one of them said to me, I took care of my father and one other person in last year, and if they both died, and my sister and I were the caregivers. No one can understand it until they go through it as caregivers and losing precious loved ones as well.
Yeah.
They said it with such profound human wisdom and compassion. And these are tough. These ladies are at Sax's. They're not pushovers.
No.
This is a great restaurant anyway, but they're strong, tough motorcycle girls.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, they have hearts as big as a room. They're so compassionate and loving, also very smart, really. And they're the ones that say, they look at me and they know what I'm going through, and their answer to me is, anything we can do for you and your wife, call us. We'll help your team of caregivers. We'll come right over as soon as we get a break. They're wonderful. But they said, no one can understand with the pain you're going through. We understand. We've been there ourselves. They're so right. And they're still here. They offer hope, encouragement, and an empathetic wisdom that they could never have had if they hadn't been through it.
Yeah.
So there's the strength and the resilience that come out of it, and yet they went through incredible pain.
Yeah.
They're the kind of people that really feel deeply,
Yeah.
and they went through plenty.
I think sometimes we may, as humans, think, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to get through this? And am I the only one feeling this? And if you're listeners, I just want you to everybody out there to know that, gosh, this is part of the human existence, is we all feel pain and sorrow and grief. And there's just, you're not alone. You're never alone.
No.
And there's always going to be a better day.
We're coming to the end of our podcast. We've got another minute or so, and I wanted to give each of you a chance just if there's anything you'd like to add before we close today.
There is. I also think about, we're telling people how to be deeply compassionate. I'll tell you something else. There's a sensitivity about how to respond to people going through this. It doesn't always mean bleeding for them and just pitying them full heart. That makes them feel worse.
Absolutely.
So it's funny, in the old Jewish testaments, there were these commentaries, they call them rabbinical, and they tell you how to talk to someone who's grieving. It's not to hemorrhage all over them. In fact, it's to feel it out and let them give you the key about where they're at that moment of grief. They may not want you to really get into it with them. They may want you to just leave them alone. Just give them the space, or just be yourself, and not over empathize, not over pity, none of that.
Absolutely.
Because people are going through it.
I think that's such a big subject. We could come back and talk about that. Yes, we are not going to be able to do that justice today. And I'm supposed to go to my commercial, but I want to give you a moment.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do in any situation, whether it's grief for a loved one who's dying or a relationship or anything, if you really want to help, my suggestion would be just to say, is there anything you need? What can I do for you?
Yes.
And then allow them to answer, or allow them to walk away and give them the space to walk away. They'll come back later if they need you.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
true.
you. Thank you both.
Yeah.
The Survivor's Guide to Life is made possible through a grant from Sonoma Coast Trauma Treatment, a 501c3 public charity that relies entirely on donations from listeners like you. If our podcast and the information we provide has benefited you or someone you care about, please think about supporting us by giving to Sonoma Coast Trauma Treatment. Our website, Sonoma Coast sctraumatreatment.org, sctraumatreatment.org. We are on Facebook and Instagram. Please like and follow us. You can reach Dr. Bernstein and myself at 707-781-3335. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next time. And thank you to Mimi
Thank you, guys.
Amaral
I
for coming and
appreciate you guys.
joining us
And
today.
Happy New Year to all.
Ah,
Yes.
Happy New Year.